Computer. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Mary Bear Shannon, and I am with my colleague Jennifer Kunsch. We are both reference librarians at the Haverford Township Free Library, and this is Herb Corner with Jen and Mary. And we are so glad to have you here for our inaugural program. We're going to try and do this monthly. Our basic desire is to talk about herbs because we're both really passionate about herbs. I am really passionate about using herbs in cooking, and Jennifer has kind of had a long-standing love of herbs for well-being. So we thought we would talk a little bit about our passions and about what we're doing in this time of being at home and in terms of growing herbs and using herbs. So welcome. And Jennifer, I'm glad to have you here. We're excited to talk with you today about this topic. So Jennifer, you've got a couple of things you want to make sure we all know before we start talking about herbs for well-being.
Yes, yeah, just a disclaimer that we're not medical health professionals at all, and this is the information that we're going to be giving you today, especially the information that I'm going to be sharing with you, is in no way meant to be medical advice. It's not meant to advise you in any way in that way, and please check with your doctor or healthcare practitioner before trying to integrate any herbs or ingest any herbs or use in any way any kinds of herbs in your life. So just a little safety message there.
Okay. And before we got started, I wanted to start us with a definition of herbs. This is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and there's a couple of entries for this word. Botany, a seed-producing annual, biennial, or perennial that does not develop persistent woody tissue but dies down at the end of a growing season. A plant or plant part valued for its medicinal, savory, or aromatic qualities. And then slang, people use herb for marijuana. And we're not meaning this definition at all. We originally called this program Herbs for Relaxation and Cooking, and we decided maybe we shouldn't do that so people wouldn't interpret our program as being having that problem or having that connotation. So before we got started. So Jennifer has a background in herbs for their qualities for well-being. So we wanted to find out more about how she uses herbs and and I was going to talk about herbs for cooking. So why don't we get started, Jennifer, first of all, and we're going to show you a couple of slides about things that either how we use herbs or herbs in our garden. So my first question to you is, what are you growing in your garden?
Right, so right now I got a little bit of a late start to my garden, but what I am growing right now in my garden is some, and you can see some of them have not been planted in the large container yet, but I've got some spearmint, some chamomile, parsley, lemongrass, cilantro, lemon balm. All of these, they're sort of a Venn diagram with culinary and medicinal. But all of them can be used therapeutically. And so yes, those are the herbs in my garden right now. Some of them have yet to be transplanted.
It looks like a good start.
Yes, I have a small patio space, so I'm waiting for more containers, and then they'll have their home.
Okay. So what are some of your favorite herbs for wellness or medicinal use?
I have a lot of favorite herbs. I like to change things up depending on how I feel or what's going on with me health-wise. But there's certain kinds of herbs that are called adaptogens, and these are herbs that basically kind of adapt to whatever your body tends to need, and they can be taken in low dose over a long term. So these are some of the favorite herbs that I like to take. So nettle is one of them, and one of the reasons I like nettle is it has it's high mineral content. It has polyphenols and lots of those good things that you find in your greens. When they say eat your greens, you can infuse nettle. I take it as a tea I buy the dried leaves from a farm that grows them using organic practices, and I infuse them in water. Also, milky oat tops have a similar nutritional profile to nettle, and so I'll combine the two. And that combination was actually prescribed to me by an herbalist for because it helps your body adapt better to this stress response. Also, ginger and turmeric, and the picture there is showing ginger root before it's been cured. So it's fresh ginger, and it's really beautiful. It smells lovely, and I'm able to get it from one of our local farm markets because there's a farm out in Downingtown that actually grows ginger. It's wonderful. They also grow
I've never seen it in that form.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and the stalks are really cool too. This has this. Sometimes they sell them at the farm market with the stalks intact, which also have a really interesting flavor, and they're really woody. You can't eat them, but you can also infuse them in warm water and make a really lovely tea kind of beverage. The next slide has the turmeric. Oh, or does it? I don't know.
Here it is. Sorry.
That is the fresh turmeric, which is really awesome too, which is fun to add to a tea. So sometimes I use the ginger and the turmeric when I feel like I'm coming down with a cold. And I know I've given it to my mom when she's had just at the beginning of any kind of infection, including apparently there's been research on coronaviruses, not COVID-19 in particular, but coronaviruses that are real strong ginger infusion or actually ginger juice when taken in high doses at the outset of just the onset of symptoms can sometimes lessen the severity of the illness. Chamomile I take for tummy issues and also relaxation. I love taking the tea bags are great, but I love using the dried whole flowers are really wonderful. You can also put them in soup. And mushrooms, there's been a lot of research to show that certain kinds of mushrooms can help have promise, I guess, with some pretty serious diseases like cancer, and also can work as adaptogens. And I actually have mushroom powder this is lion's mane. It's also called pom pom, and from a farm in upstate New York that grinds it into a powder, and I add it to soups and stews and things like that. Oh, and here's my bag of the milky oat tops that I put in my tea also. Thanks.
So you've kind of already started on this, but how do you personally use herbs for well-being? Any others that you can mention that you use?
So yeah, lemon balm is also a great one for the minerals. It's kind of like nettle, but it has it has sort of this lemony, nice flavor, and research has been done on it. It's been traditionally used for relaxation, for help with lowering stress and sort of getting ready for bed. If you add it with chamomile, it's a great like bedtime tea. So that's another one that I like.
So, we read a lot of things on the internet about herbs, and how can we better understand the information that we're seeing in the internet about herbs?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to understand because there are a lot of claims out there that aren't necessarily, it's not that they're not true, but there's like a kernel of it that's true, but then there's a lot of that's not being considered. And so one easy thing to remember is that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Like there's no one herb that's going to cure a disease like whole-handedly with one shot. And so when you're looking for herbal information, it's good to read laterally. That would be across several different sources, like ideally 3 or more. Government sources, educational sources, not necessarily commercial sources. Especially you want to stay away from anecdotal, like user reviews, things like that, because they can't be really trusted to give reliable information. You want things that come from clinical studies and research. I can talk about what the research is saying if you want me to.
You mentioned research, and I was wondering, how do you find out what the research is saying about medicinal herbs?
Right. So you can look in there's sources, real authoritative sources like the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, and also Medline Plus. Medline Plus is a wonderful resource that comes out of the National Libraries of Medicine, and both of these can be accessed through our through the library's website, actually. You can also just find them on the open internet. They're free sources compiled by, scientists, epidemiologists, herbalists, all kinds of professionals in the field who do research. The one tricky thing about collecting research on herbs is that it's so much of the research that you'll see will end with kind of a vague more research needs to be done. Oh yes, I'm sorry, here's a slide with more information. There's the American Herbalist Guild, Herbalists Without Borders, the Herb Society of America. That kind of rounds out. There are a lot of good sources, but these are some that I would recommend you try to find different information about a different herb. And you might want to pick one herb in particular and just try all of those sources and see what they all say, see if there's a consensus. But yeah, research on herbs can be tricky because, for example, like a pharmaceutical man-made drug, like let's say ibuprofen, comes like it's one chemical, or maybe it's a series of chemicals, but it's just like a constituent, and then it's made into a medicine. Whereas herbs have many constituents and chemical compounds within one plant. So research is often done on herbs by taking one constituent out of a plant and researching that, as opposed to researching the whole plant. The research will also be different. Results might be different if the herb was dried as opposed to fresh. If the herb was used in an infusion or in an alcohol extract, all of that is going to make a difference as to how it's going to affect a particular illness or affect your system. And particularly the research in the United States doesn't take all of that into account. There's a lot of research coming out of Asia and Europe that are more, that take into account the different kinds of herbal preparations when you're doing research. Also, there's not a lot of funding in the United States for herbal research, so that's why you find a lot of these studies that are like, well, we don't really know, there's some promise, but we don't know yet.
I was just gonna flip to this slide, Jennifer, because you talked about some different ways that you prepare herbs. Maybe you could talk a little bit about these terms.
Sure. So an infusion is where I would take, let's say, my dried nettle and the dried oat tops, and maybe also some lemon balm, and I'd put it like a quarter cup or maybe half a cup of all of that in a jar, maybe a 16-ounce jar, and I pour some water into it. It could be cold water, it could be warm water, it could be hot water, and then you're literally just infuse those herb will infuse the liquid, and I could do it like at bedtime, and it'll infuse all night, and then strain out the solids and drink it throughout the day, the next day. That doesn't tend to keep, so it's usually good, something good to do, that you're going to drink for the whole next day. A decoction is basically a stronger version of an infusion. It's where you take boiled water, you boil water with the herb, and you boil it together for about 15 minutes, and then you let it sit for a while, also, and then strain it, and then you can drink it throughout the day. So the alcohol extractions they look like this. They come in little bottles, and they're where you take either dried or fresh herb and some water, and then alcohol. Alcohol does a couple things. First, it helps the herb, it keeps for a very long time, so that, and it also, it's also a very concentrated herbal preparation, and sometimes certain herbs need the alcohol to help the constituents and the therapeutic parts of the herb come out and work better. Also, it's interesting because the type of water used will also have an effect on how well the herb works in general, or if the water is acidic or alkaline. So it's interesting in that way.
So my other question is, how can you ensure safety with medicinal herbs?
That is a great question and a very important question. So first, this bears repeating. We're not health professionals here, so I'm talking about herbs that I enjoy and that work for me, and I've also worked with a health professional around it. So avoid self-diagnosing yourself from things that you might read in a book or on the internet. Try not to self-treat with herbal medicines. unless you've consulted with a doctor or a healthcare practitioner. Primarily because if maybe you're taking medicines, and sometimes a lot of times herbs can have an effect on the medicine that you're already taking. Sometimes it's fine, but sometimes it will enhance the medicine you're taking. Sometimes it will do something else. So there are possible contraindications with medicines that you're taking. Also, you want to be careful about where you're sourcing the herbs. I would avoid sourcing herbs from Amazon or any online marketplace, especially where you're purchasing from a third-party vendor. So, yes. Oh, and also just that the herbal market and the supplement market are not regulated in any way. Like, we have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to ensure safety and efficacy of drugs and also the safety of our food supply, but there's no regulatory body that oversees herbs in that way, which doesn't necessarily mean the herb preparations are unsafe always. It just means that because they're not regulated, a lot of care should be taken about how you source them. And the closer they are to a food, the safer you're going to be. So like ginger, turmeric, the oat tops, and the more they resemble a food form as opposed to a pill or a capsule or an extract, pretty much the safer you're going to be.
And you've already talked about some resources. Do you have other resources for us today on herbs?
Yeah, so tacking on to this idea of, so these are the books, yes. These are a couple books that I really like. There are a lot of really good herb books. One of my favorites, two of my favorites here are the Herbal Antivirals by Stephen Booner, who's written a lot. He's done a lot of gathering of research. I really enjoy the fact that he does very thorough and rigorous research around all of a particular herb. He'll take all of the stuff from Asia, all the stuff from Europe. He will make a distinction between if the research was based on, an infusion or an extract, or if it was done with a fresh herb or the dried herb. And he's done a lot of work around antivirals, antibacterial, and people who are struggling with Lyme disease and how herbal preparations can help with that. My other favorite book is the Invasive Plant Medicine, which talks about how a lot of our invasive plants that are really like noxious and annoying and we want to get rid of are in fact great treasure troves of healing if enough research is done on them. For example, kudzu is a very invasive plant that is a big problem down south. And it turns out that a lot of research is showing it can be very effective with chronic Lyme disease. Okay. So those are some of my favorite books.
Yeah, and then you had a couple for the web that we've talked about that are really great. Okay, well, thank you. And maybe we should.
I just want to mention the one in terms of the resources. I talked about how the closest to food, the better. And that you can find great, I don't know if you were going to ask, Mary, I didn't want to, I just wanted to make sure I got the, about ordering tinctures or preparations, that there are certain farms that I trust, and those are the ones that grow their own plants and then make the herbal preparations themselves, and they're often professional herbalists who are employed there. And they take great care and pride in their work. You can call them and ask them questions. And I do have, this is where I get some of the tinctures that I use. And I remember even ordering something once from this place in upstate New York, and they sent me the sunflower essence because the sunflowers were in perfect bloom and they felt like the sun and the earth and the rain gave it a certain kind of energy. And so they just sent that to me.
And we can add those resources to this video, all of those different places where you sourced it. You got different tinctures.
Yeah, absolutely. And also there's some local places here in Pennsylvania that are wonderful. If you wanted to grow herbs, you could go to your local farm market. You could go to Tadio's. We have there are local nurseries that are great for these, and that have a lot of them have prepaying curbside pickup.
Okay, great. All right, so maybe we should move on to cooking. So Jennifer's going to interview me about cooking with herbs. So
Mary, what do you have in your beautiful herb garden? What do you grow?
I will have to say that being that we have been home for so long, my garden is probably in the best shape it's been in ever. And I also really benefit from having a son who's really into gardening. He's home from college and had been finishing out his semester online. But we both find being in the garden to be good therapy. But I have to say, most of my herbs are actually in pots. And I think that is probably because, oh, here's a couple more resources from you. But I think it's because it's just easier to grab herbs when I'm cooking in the kitchen. So a lot of these are on my deck. This one is my dill, which I'm hoping to do some refrigerator pickles soon with my dill. I also have thyme, and I don't think I've ever had this this thyme bloom like this. So it's just gorgeous this time of year, and it's nice and big. I've had it for a number of years, and what I love about it is that it comes back every year. I have basil. This is just one of the many basil plants I have. That is one of those things that we love to grow here and make lots of pesto. I have mint, which I've actually almost killed, but I am actually planning on transplanting these to some pots. Mint is actually very hard to kill, and it does spread very fast. So if you plant it somewhere, be prepared to cut it back. And then I have flat leaf parsley, which is actually my favorite parsley. I prefer it over to the curly leaf parsley, which I don't think has got as good a taste as the flat leaf. And then I have a couple of window boxes here. As you can see, well, I have rosemary, tarragon, oregano, and chives. My oregano is about to overtake the entire box, so I am going to replant that pretty soon. Lavender, I have basil, rosemary, and chives. So I'm really happy with what I've got growing this year. Again, I really like having it on my deck so that I can just pop out and snip some things so that I can continue to cook. So that's what I have. I do have cilantro planted, but they're really just seedlings at this point. So I'm buying those out at the grocery store.
That's beautiful. Okay. So what are the herbs that you most enjoy using in cooking?
So I love using thyme in chicken dishes. I make this, I'm going to show you a couple of things I've been making since I have been in quarantine. I do a cooking show for the library, and recently I just made a cassoulet, which is a French dish. It's kind of like a French stew with pork and beans. I used rosemary, thyme, and parsley in that. I have also just recently made some pico de gallo, which is a kind of a fresh salsa, and I use cilantro in that. And then chicken pesto pasta salad, I made that just this last week, and I used the basil to make the pesto. Some other things that I have used, I love making this French onion skillet chicken. It uses thyme, and I love anything with the caramelized onions. And thyme tends to be something that really goes well with chicken. And then lastly, when I don't know what to make, and I have chicken, but I don't know what to do with it in the summer, a lot of times I'll just go out and snip something from all of my plants and put it all in as a marinade. So I call this a garden grilled chicken, and I put in chives, thyme, tarragon, basil, rosemary, and parsley. And I put some crushed garlic and some olive oil, salt and pepper, and a little bit of rice vinegar, and then marinated about a half an hour, and then just put it on the grill. And that's usually when I'm out of ideas for anything else. So that's what I have been doing. And as I mentioned, I am going to use my dill for refrigerator pickles.
So that looks so delicious.
Yeah.
So your garden grilled chicken has all these herbs in it. Now, are there any dishes that you find though that are better for like one particular herb rather than another, or some, that are better for certain dishes than other dishes?
So, like as I mentioned, the thyme often goes well with chicken. That's a very, thyme shows up in a lot of French cooking. You'll see that in many recipes that tend to be that. But I think thyme tends to go well with chicken. I've also seen it with pork dishes as well. Um, I also think rosemary is a makes a good complement with pork. Um, a lot of times I'll rub a pork roast with rosemary, which I think is just delicious. Cilantro is one of those spices, are one of those herbs that has its roots in many different cultures, not only in Mexican food, but in South Asian food and Southeast Asian food. I know in China they actually called cilantro a Chinese parsley. I mean, it's one of those things that is used in many dishes in China. So and you'll see that called for in a lot of those dishes. Basil and oregano are commonly known as for Italian foods, but I use basil for a lot of different things. And the oregano, I also see often in Greek dishes. It's a very strong flavor, so fresh oregano, a little bit goes a really long way. So just be careful about overpowering. I think dishes for oregano have to be, the meats have to be really strong to kind of stand up to the oregano. So just be a little careful with that.
Cool. So do you prefer fresh to dried, or are there certain instances where fresh is better than dried or dried is better than fresh? And how do you convert if let's say you've run out of fresh herbs?
Well, I prefer using fresh. I just think it makes the dish. But I can't always use fresh. I don't always. I may be calling for something. Maybe calling for an herb in the middle of the winter. Sometimes I will go out and purchase cut herbs, but I find that there's a lot of waste with that. I'll have a dish will call for just a teaspoon or two of something, and then I have a ton of it left. So that's and a lot of times it just goes to waste in my refrigerator. That's why I love to have them in pots, because I can snip off exactly what I need and not have to get a whole bunch of something when I only need a little bit. But I think the dried can be fine too. I just think it needs to be fresh. You can get spices at the grocery store. I tend to think the grocery store spices tend to be a little bit expensive for the small amount that you get. I think a bulk food store, sometimes you can get a smaller amount and for a more reasonable cost, something like, head nut. I always say that head nut's one of those places where I feel like I'm trying to stump them every time, because they come in with some request for a spice and I think they're not going to have it, and they go, oh yeah, we have it. So there are that may be an alternative, and you can buy less of it at a bulk store. You can get like 1 ounce or 2 ounce, whether other than getting a big jar or something that you may not use. And I would say with dried spices, after a year, I would probably get rid of it. It's just not going to have the kind of potency that you want. It definitely loses flavor. In terms of a conversion, generally the rule of thumb is 2 to 3 times to 1. So if you are looking at a dish that calls for a teaspoon of a dried spice, I would use 2 to 3 teaspoons of fresh. And that really is because the flavor is concentrated in the dry ingredient. I would say either 2 times or possibly 3 as your conversion.
So what if I wanted to grow some herb plants? Like, where can I get some? Can I start from seed? If I did start from seed, when would I do that?
I mean, I think that a lot of the home improvement stores sell herbs. I know that our local Tadio's is selling herbs. I think they tend to be the kind of the standard herbs. So I think if you're looking for something different or kind of exotic. I mean, there are so many different types of basils. I mean, you can get lemon basil, and there's just all these different types. And I don't think you're going to find those herbs at those standard stores. So you may need to go to something a little bit more special, or you may want to just grow it from seed if you want something a little bit more specialized than just the standard basil and parsley. You can grow things from seed. I think if you start at this point, you're going to get your plants a little later in the season, but that's perfectly okay too. If you've got them in a pot on your deck, you can bring them in for the winter and use it while it's keeping warm inside. There are some of your spices, some of your herbs that will winter over, and some that won't. It really depends on the herb, and based on this climate, there are like my rosemary wintered over this winter, but it normally does not. It normally dies off, and I have to get another plant. But it was a pretty warm winter, so some things will carry over to the next. My thyme, it comes back every year, which is great.
Cool. I want to add, it just occurred to me that some of the arboretums, it didn't work out this year because of COVID. But I know sometimes I've gotten some really wonderfully unique herbs at like Tyler Arboretum's plant sale, their annual plant sale. So that's another source that people can get herb plants from.
Yeah.
So did you cover where?
I have a couple of resources that I just wanted to mention. There are some online resources about using herbs for cooking. The Urban Cultivator Cooking with Herbs is a great page on that website to learn more about how to use spices, and then how to dry them, and what kind of dishes you could use them with. And then Mother Earth Living Cooking with Herbs is also a good site to use for cooking with herbs. I also have a couple of books. The nice thing is that all of these are available online. The first two here you can actually get on Overdrive, Libby. Cook, Grow, Eat by Will Galloway. Eat Edible Pots and Spots, Small Space Gardens for Growing Vegetables and Herbs in Containers, Raised Beds, and More. That's Stacy Hervella. They're both on Libby. And then there's two on Hoopla. So the nice thing is there's no waiting on Hoopla. Cooking with Herbs, 50 Simple Recipes for Fresh Flavor, and The Kitchen Herb Garden, Growing and Preparing Essential Herbs by Rosalind Creasy. The other thing I just wanted to say about cooking with herbs is, especially if you are, really trying to cut like fat in your diet or other things. I mean, herbs are a great substitute for things that are not as good for you. So herbs really can be a great complement to foods that are very healthy for you. So I would definitely keep that in mind as you are using herbs for your dishes this summer, is that it is a great substitute for sugar and salt and fat. And I think it will add a lot of flavor with not a whole lot of calories. So, thank you. So, do we have more to say about cooking with herbs or with well-being? I
think we covered things with cooking. Is there anything? I think you pretty much covered a whole lot.
We have, and the good news is that this is going to be a recurring program. We are going to do this again in June, so be on the lookout for Herb Corner. We're going to try and do it the fourth Wednesday of the month. We have so many other things that we could talk about in terms of herbs for well-being and herbs for cooking. So, and if you've got questions for us, we would be happy to answer them here on our show. You can just send your questions to reference@haverfordlibrary.org.
Definitely. Yeah. Or if you'd like to hear us talk about anything particular having to do with plants or herbs, let us know.
So I think that's it. And thank you for being with us for our inaugural Herb Corner with Jen and Mary. And we hope you all have a great day and a great week, and hopefully you'll enjoy some herbs. Okay. Thank you and take care.
Bye.